What's up YouTube, Capital G here, checking out the brand new Gem Crocodile Cook cards that just got revealed. We know that these are going to be released in the next Battles of Legends, and from what I can tell, this is going to be almost identical to Invoked, or as a lot of people corrected me in the last video, well come on Cap, these are GX cards, so these were the original Invoked, and you guys know what I mean. This is going to have a very similar playstyle to Invoked. We know that this is fusion based. They also have a fusion spell in Fossil Fusion that allows us to use our opponent's graveyard to summon our fusion monsters just like Invoked, and we only have one main deck monster so far, so this is essentially Invoked Part 2, or really the original Invoked, but it's going to be probably a blind go second beatdown deck, and so far it looks like they're off to a relatively nice start. Anyways, let's go ahead and check out the first, or really the only main deck monster so far. This is Weathering Soldier. It's a level 4 Earth monster, rock type, because all of this stuff is rock type. 2000 attack and 1200 defense. Actually pretty good stats for a level 4 monster. The first effect is a hard once per turn. That effect says if this card is sent to the graveyard by an effect, or if this card is destroyed by battle, you can add from your deck to your hand either Fossil Fusion or one card that specifically lists Fossil Fusion in its text, except another copy of Weathering Soldier. Second effect, once per turn during the end phase, this card loses 600 attack. Okay, so this is the core monster that we're building this deck around, and it's a fantastic monster. Not only can it float upon being destroyed by battle, but we can also manually activate this card. We can easily do something like dumping it into the graveyard with a Foolish Burial. That'll get us our Fossil Fusion from our deck, and if we're going second, there's a very good chance we're going to be able to fusion summon during our first turn because we already have our rock monster in the graveyard, and our opponent probably is going to have a monster in their graveyard. That means we'll be able to drop a fusion monster relatively easily. Keep in mind, you can obviously run things like Mathematician. I figure that'll be a staple in this deck because Mathematician, drop your Weathering Soldier into the graveyard, get yourself a +1, and still just do the same play that I was talking about. This also searches the spells and the traps in the deck outside of just Fossil Fusion. So if you already have Fossil Fusion, you can go for a different card. So this is obviously a 3 of, and again, it even has good stats. So it's like you don't even have to just rely on card effects, you know, sending it to the graveyard. You can just summon it, beat your opponent down, and when they run it over, it's fine, it floats anyways. Now to the fusion monsters, and there are a lot of them, so I'll start with the lower level guys and I'll work my way up. The first one's going to be Fossil Dragon SKULLGAR. This is a level 4 Earth Rock fusion monster, 2500 attack, 0 defense, but who needs defense points? We're trying to kill our opponent. Fusion materials are 1 rock monster plus 1 level 4 or lower monster in your opponent's graveyard. This is again why I say you're going to want to blind second, because you're going to want to use your opponent's graveyard once they have some stuff in it. The first effect, or actually this card must be first summoned with Fossil Fusion, and then the second effect is a hard once per turn. First effect says if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. Second effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 Fossil Fusion from your deck to your hand. So it's nice. We already had a couple of ways of getting Fossil Fusion, whether it be getting it back from the graveyard with the big level 8 fusion monster, or obviously the soldier, which we just talked about, being able to add it from your deck to your hand. But having another way, then it just becomes, you know, more consistent, because essentially if you fusion summon into this guy and your opponent does happen to kill it, it's fine. You're just going to be able to banish it from the graveyard, and it's going to replace itself with another Fossil Fusion, and then maybe you can use this guy to facilitate another fusion summon, you know, off of the fusion or the Fossil Fusion that you just searched. So obviously strong card, and we want as many ways possible to be able to get to our Fossil Fusion, because that is the main way of fusion summoning in this deck. The next card is going to be Fossil Warrior Skull Bone. This is a level 4 as well. It's an Earth Rock monster, 2000 attack, and it is 800 defense. Now this guy requires 1 rock monster plus 1 level 4 or lower monster. So this can just use your graveyard if your opponent doesn't have anything in their graveyard. It must first be special summoned with Fossil Fusion, and your second effect once again is a hard once per turn. First effect, this card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. The second effect says you can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 time stream from your deck to your hand. So time stream is a spell card we're going to talk about a little later. It's very similar to something like Mass Change in this deck, but this card is very similar to the last card. It's basically just a big beat stick. I think I prefer probably 2500 attack a little more on a level 4 monster, because 2000's okay, but I don't know how much damage you're doing, especially against like mid-sized monsters. You might not be able to get over them. However, being able to float into another card is still very valuable. If you don't need Fossil Fusion, you might need the Time Stream. Again, just wait for me to talk about that card after I'm done with the fusions, but you're gonna play both of these level 4s. Next up is our level 6 fusion monster. This is Fossil Warrior Skull Knight, which of course is an earth, and it's also a rock type. This guy is 2400 attack, 1100 defense. Your materials are a rock monster plus 1 level 5 or 6 monster. So this is probably the most specific out of all the fusion monsters that Jim Crocodile Cook has gotten so far. Must first be special summoned with Fossil Fusion, and your third effect is your hard once per turn. First effect, if this card attacks a defense position monster, you get your piercing battle damage. Second effect, when this attacking monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can activate this effect. This card can attack once again in a row. Third effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one monster on the field, destroy that monster. All right, this is another fusion monster that I like very much. If the theme with this archetype is big ass fusion beat sticks that can beat the crap out of your opponent, but also give you a nice little bonus effect, I think Konami is nailing it here. When you're looking at just the big ass beat stick part of this card, all right, well, I can potentially attack twice and I get piercing damage. So this is a card that can do a whole lot of damage by itself. Being able to attack twice, we know that has been good since the days of like BLS, the old school one. And then if this card happens to die, you can just get some spot removal. You can just banish it from the graveyard and then blow up a monster on your opponent's side of the field. Now, I'm not gonna lie, if that was a quick effect, oh my goodness, this card would have been absolutely nuts, but it just feels like a very good card. If your opponent doesn't kill it, they're probably gonna be taking a lot of battle damage. If your opponent does kill it, it's fine. I'm just gonna banish it from the graveyard and kill one of their monsters anyways. So just a really solid card in my opinion. Lastly, we have another level 8, and keep in mind one of the cover cards of this set is also a fossil level 8. That would be the Fossil Warrior Skull King. This level 8 is the Fossil Dragon SKULLGIOS. It is a level 8 Earth Rock monster, 3500 attack. Damn, you are up there with Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Hey, maybe this is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Anyways, 0 defense. It requires a rock monster plus a level 7 or higher monster in your opponent's graveyard. So that's the difference between this guy and Skull King, is the fact that Skull King can use either graveyard. This card specifically says your opponent's graveyard. Your first effect is if this card battles an opponent's monster, before damage calculation, you can switch the attack and defense of that opponent's monster until the end of the damage step. Second effect, if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. And then third effect, double any battle damage your opponent takes from battles involving their monster and this fusion summon card. Okay, so this card is like the perfect representation of what the Fossil deck is all about. We're not about a bunch of fancy spancy monster effects or trying to control our opponent or any of that jazz. We are an old school Yu-Gi-Oh beatdown deck. We want to summon big ass fossil monsters and kill our opponent ASAP. This card allows you to do that. This card's very similar to Blue Eyes Chaos Max in my opinion, not only having that piercing damage, but then also having the double battle damage, which is still an effect that I really love, especially for ending the game. And what I like most about this guy is no matter what your opponent's monster is in, whether it be attack mode, defense mode, whatever, they're still going to take maximum damage, because if they're in defense mode and they have high defense, okay, who cares? I'll just swap your defense points with your attack points, run you over and do double damage. Or if they're in attack position but they have 0 defense, I'll just swap the points that way. So yeah, this card is really good. I feel like it's a card where you probably only need to run one of it, because I feel like if you summon it, you probably should be ending the game with it. And I like these type of cards, these Chaos Max cards that they're like one punch cards. You attack your opponent once and do like 7,000 to 8,000 damage. Next up, we have our spell cards. The first one is Time Stream. Keep in mind it's searchable by the level 4 we talked about earlier. It's a normal spell card that says target one fossil fusion monster you control, tribute that monster, and by the way, tributing is not a cost. It happens at resolution, which is awesome with this card. And if you do, special summon from your extra deck one fossil fusion monster that is 2 levels higher than the tributed monster's original level. this is treated as a fusion summon with Fossil Fusion. Second effect, during your main phase, except the turn that this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card and one Fossil Fusion monster from your graveyard, then target another Fossil Fusion monster in your graveyard, special summon it. So this card it's very similar to Mass Change in my opinion, or I guess you could kind of say it's more like ranking up one of your Fossil Fusion monsters. You take one of your 4s and then turn it into the 6. You take one of your 6s and then turn it into one of the 8s. It does count as a properly fusion monster, which is definitely really nice. And then this card also has a graveyard effect that is basically a built-in monster reborn for one of your Fossil Fusion monsters. So this card technically can end up being a +1 if your graveyard is loaded up with a bunch of those Fossil Fusion monsters. The only way this card could have been more insane is if they would have made it a quick play, but then it might have actually been a little too OP because, you know, having a monster reborn from the graveyard built into, you know, a quick play fusion might have actually made this deck a little too good. But overall, the fact that this card is searchable, I think it's definitely good. I'm thinking this is probably like a 2 of in the deck. Next up is Miracle Recapture, normal spell card that's a hard once per turn. Send one level 4 or lower rock monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if Fossil Fusion is in your graveyard, draw one card. So this is pretty simple. It works with our only main deck monster, that being the Weathering Soldier. It allows him to basically activate his effect and get us another Fossil Fusion from our deck, or get any of the other spells or traps if we need those. And if we already have Fossil Fusion in our grave, we get to draw one card. So I mean, it just seems pretty good. You might not even technically need to run Foolish Burial because this is just in essence a better version of Foolish Burial in this deck. Lastly, we have Specimen Inspection, normal spell that's a hard once per turn. Reveal one Fossil Fusion in your hand. Send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. That is not a cost. And if you do, declare one monster type and level. And if you do that, your opponent sends one monster of the declared type and level from their hand or deck to the graveyard, if any. Okay, so I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a card that forces your opponent to have monsters in their graveyard so that you can banish those monsters for your fusion summons. And you even get to, you know, pick the level to make sure that you can fusion summon into whatever you want to. But honestly, this card just seems a little too risky. We know that there are so many cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that activate when they're sent to the graveyard. So if your opponent sends one of those, you could really be messing yourself up. In addition to that, you do have to send another card from your hand to the graveyard to activate this. If you send the Weathering Soldier, it's okay because that is going to float into another card, as this is not a cost. That's why they made this not a cost, by the way, so that it could trigger the Weathering Soldier. But to me, this just feels too risky. I think that you're perfectly fine relying on your opponent's graveyard if you just blind second. Like, I mean, they're gonna have something in their graveyard unless they're playing like Guru Control or something like that. I don't know if I would play this card, honestly. It just feels a little too risky. It feels like it could backfire very easily. But whatever you guys think of the Gem Crocodile Cook support so far, you leave that in the comment section below. I'm a fan. I like beatdown decks. I think this is actually really good support. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.